What I'm going to talk about today, like Ms. Osei said, is financial aid. There are a lot of different issues that will affect your awarding and your time here and your ability to graduate on time if you are relying on financial aid funding. And those issues are some that aren't necessarily very openly talked about. They can be very intricate issues. There's been a lot of changes, like Ms. Osei said, because those changes, we have a lot of different things that we'll have to talk about and that you guys really need to be aware of so that you aren't coming into the financial aid office first day of the quarter or even a year in or so and trying to figure out what's going on. They are federal regulations, so the things that we talk about today, it's not because I'm just telling you that because I don't like you or anything like that. They are things that are very hard bound that we have to abide by because of federal regulations. So, first things first, I just want everyone to be aware of the financial aid portal. This is our interactive system. Most schools have something similar where you can log on with your social security number and your student PIN number and at any time during the day take a look to see where you are with financial aid. When you log on, and I'm sorry I don't have that up right now, but when you log on you'll be able to see what your financial aid award is if you've been awarded, the types of financial aid, the dollar amounts. You'll be able to see if you haven't been awarded, things that have been turned in, items that are missing, where you are in our review process, and messages that we might have for you. It is interactive to the second, so the minute I make a change in my system, you're going to be able to see that. So it is very up to the minute as far as accuracy and just things that we have going on at that moment. So you can come in right when I do things. The other thing that we're going to be talking about today, the bigger portion of everything, is satisfactory academic progress. The government, when they're giving you money, they expect that you are going to be abiding by certain regulations and expectations for you as far as credit requirements and GPA. The biggest one is the credit requirements. That is where the government says that you have enrolled and you have received aid for a certain amount of credits, and they expect you to complete credits within that frame. And we'll go through the chart here in just a moment. One of the biggest misconceptions that students have when they come in and they apply for financial aid is we tell them, hey, whether it was 5 months ago or 5 years ago, in fact, I've had people from 20, 30 years ago, they'll come in and they'll have not completed credits. And unfortunately, the government says that even if you were not receiving funding at the time that you were enrolled in these credits and did not complete them, you are still responsible and held accountable for those lack of credit fulfillments. And one of the other misconceptions that we have from students, and they say that they hear it from instructors, so we're trying to get that away, is that everything counts. If you do not complete credits, whether it is through failing a class, getting a Z grade, getting an incomplete, or getting a withdraw, that counts against you. So if you register for 15 credits, say 3 classes, and you unfortunately have a family emergency and your instructor says, oh, well, I'll give you a Z grade. That doesn't hurt you as far as your transcript goes, but that's going to count as credits not earned. You got a certain amount of financial aid for this quarter and you did not complete the fulfillments or the credit fulfillment for that quarter, so you are going to be in a little bit of trouble. And where you are as far as that trouble goes is what we're going to talk about here in a few moments. So I'm hoping everybody understands that whenever you register for a certain amount of credits after our census day, which we'll also talk about, you need to make sure that you're completing those credits. And if they are not completed, there are going to be some ramifications. Grade point average is the second portion of that. I'm not saying that you had a bad quarter or you had a quarter where you only got one class with a 1.7 and all of your other classes were 4.0s. That's not really the issue that we're looking at here. If you got credit for the class, but your GPA quarterly for all the classes or cumulatively is below 2.0, that's where we're also going to run into some trouble. So if out of all your classes for the quarter you got below 2.0, that's where we're going to be contacting you because you're either going to be in a probationary status or a suspension status. And then the last one is one that academic advising is really working with us a lot on, and that is maximum time frame. The government will only fund up to a certain amount of credits for you here at the duration of school. And it's something that is for all schools, but by the nature of us being a 2-year school, the amount of credits that they allow is significantly less than, say, at a 4-year school like Eastern. So the government says that we can only fund up to 125% of 1-degree program before we have to put you on a hold status. For a 90-degree, or 90-credit AA program, that's 113 credits. That's not a whole lot of credits over. So say you had some elective classes, you weren't quite sure what you were doing. If you've stayed in that AA degree the entire time, because we only look at the current program that you're in, and you now go over that 125% mark, you're going to be placed on a hold status. And so we'll talk about that here a little bit more. Award terms and conditions kind of got in there, sorry. When you guys get your financial aid award, we normally will always base it off of full time at the very beginning. That award is going to be based off of 12 credits or more. About a week or so before school starts, a week and a half before school starts, I go in and make adjustments based off of the amount of credits that you are actually in. So we just want you to know that when you get that award letter, make sure you're reading over all of the terms and conditions. And the biggest one is enrollment, because a lot of students will say, oh, well, I got my award letter and it says that I got $18.50 in Pell for the quarter, and then you drop down below to say 6 credits, a week before school starts, and then they wonder, where did all my money go? That's going to be a problem because I can only award you up to the amount of credits that you're actually in. So it is on a prorated basis. So that award term and conditions letter that you get, just make sure that you're reading over it very, very carefully, because it's going to outline, stipulate pretty much everything that I'm talking about today. Okay. And going back to that credit issue as far as dropping credits, especially with our new Hire One system, have you guys all heard about Hire One? The way that we're distributing money. How do I say this? When you register for classes, there's going to be a certain point, and I try to push it back as far as possible up until school starts, but your funding is going to calculate at the amount of credits that you're actually in. If you, say, a couple days before school starts, drop classes and you go down to, say, only half-time as opposed to full-time, I'm going to have to go through a system where I pull back your money and recalculate your funds. So just know that you really are going to want to get your school schedule solidified as quickly as possible, especially the week before school starts. And I know that's hard because a lot of you are trying to coach classes and get into some of those classes that aren't necessarily open. I totally understand. And you're not doing anything wrong, but know that if you're sitting there and playing with your schedule a few days before school starts, it really is going to delay your funding, because I'm going to have to cancel your funds. It'll have to go through our accounting system, and then I'll have to reorder them. So we really don't want there to be any surprises on the first day when you're trying to buy books and you realize that I've had to cancel all of your money to get it at the right amount. So just make sure you're paying attention to that as you are adding and dropping classes before this quarter starts. Oh, and this goes back to the proration of your award. So remember how I was talking about that full-time, 3/4 time, half-time status? With grant funding, and this is really only applicable to the grant funding, we can only give you up to a prorated amount of the credits that you're enrolled in. 12 credits is full-time, 12 and above, and a lot of students, there's a misconception that they think that you can't get financial aid as long as you're not in full-time. You can. The grant funding is just on a prorated basis. It's literally a percentage of the amount of credits that you're in. So 12 and above is 100% of your grant funding. Anywhere from 9 to 11 is 3/4 time, 75% of your funding. 6 to 8 is half-time, 50%, you get the gist. And if you are in anywhere 5 and below, that is considered less than half-time. That is 25% of your funding. And there are a couple of awards, like the tuition grant, that you cannot receive unless you are at least half-time. This same thing will apply to work study. You have to be in at least 6 credits for work study, but it is not prorated. You have to be in at least 6 credits for loan funding, also not prorated. And those credit enrollment issues are going to be coming into play when I talk about the maximum time frame in a little bit, okay? So just keep that in mind as we're talking. You're going to copy it down? You know what? When we're all done, you guys, that's when I'll take some questions, and then I'll leave it open as long as you want for any sort of copying and stuff, okay? Okay. I know that we talked about adding and dropping classes before school starts, but one of the things I want to talk about is census day. And this is one of the new changes just actually in the last quarter that we have had, that a lot of students have had a difficult time with. I've had a difficult time with it. Census day can be set by the school any day. It used to be our 10th day. That is the day in which you are locked into the classes in which you register for. And I know that's kind of a confusing statement because you are free to withdraw from the classes, that's fine. But as far as your enrollment goes, say you registered for 15 credits, that is what you're locked in at. So if you go and you drop a class, that's where we're going to come into the satisfactory academic progress issue, because it looks like you're in 15 credits, and if you drop that class, you only completed 10 out of the 15 credits. Same thing with how we award your financial aid. Pell Grant funding specifically says that I have to award you and give you money for the amount of credits that you were in as of census day. Our census day has now changed from the 10th day to the 5th day. So know that you need to make sure that your schedule is solidified, pre-solidified by the 5th day of the quarter, because I can only give you money, the right amount of money, up until that day. So if say you're in 15 credits on the 4th day of the quarter, and you go and you drop a class that Friday, so you're down to 10 credits, and then you say, oh my gosh, bio just opened up, and I think I'm going to go get into another class on Monday. It's not going to work. You're going to be charged for that class because I can only give you grant funding up to that 5th day. So if you're only in 10 credits as of that 5th day, that's the only amount of money I can give you for. Does that make sense? So it has caused a lot of problems because the 10th day used to be our census day, and most people were pretty worked out by that time. But now that we've converted to the 5th day, even though there is that contingency that you need to get an instructor's signature, students are still getting in, but they're not understanding that they're going to be held liable for those charges for that extra class that they picked up because I can't give you any more money. So there's the issue of census day as far as how you get your money and how much you get, and then also know that your schedule needs to be pretty solid because of satisfactory academic progress. If you are in a class and A&P just isn't working out for you, you're going to really want to add and drop that class before the 5th day, because if you don't and you go to withdraw, that's where the satisfactory academic progress, probation, and suspension is going to come in, because it's going to look like you didn't complete those credits. And I know it sounds really unfair that you've only got 5 days to do it, but it's what the government tells us that we have to do. Also in regards to census day, what some of the students, or things that I hear about the students say about census day, is that they don't understand that there's money that they have to pay back. Well, the general gist is you have 5 days to go in between and figure out what your schedule is. You are paid up to the 5th day for whatever classes you're in, but if you drop, say you're in full time, and then you drop to half-time, you don't get to keep the full amount of money that it gave you on the first day of class. You're responsible for paying that back. And sometimes one credit can make a big difference in how much money you have to pay back. Say you got $1,387 in Pell Grant funding, because that's 3/4 time for full Pell, and you were 9 credits and you dropped one PE class down to 8, well guess what, that's now half-time and you only get $925. You're responsible for the charge for that difference, and that's when I get to send you a letter saying that you get to pay that back. So just keep that in mind as well when you're adding and dropping classes. It's something that I like to tell students because I don't like there to be a lot of surprises when it comes time for me to make these calculations and bill you. Let's see here. Unofficial withdrawals, I won't talk a whole lot about that. When you guys unofficially withdraw, the same things happen. There's the same implications. You'll be charged for any amounts of funds that you have collected but are not eligible for, and the same thing with official withdrawals. Know that with the withdrawals, we go through a process called RTT4, or Return to Title IV funds. When you go to withdraw, we literally use a math calculation that considers how much money you received, what type of money you received, and how long you were actually in the classes for. So you are literally getting a prorated amount of what we consider you to be eligible for and to keep. And the rest of that amount of money will be charged to you because you didn't attend for a duration of time in order to receive all of that money. The 60% point is the time of the quarter that you must be in attendance before you get to keep all of your money. We consider you to have been in full attendance, okay? And again, it is a very detailed thing, so if you have questions about that, feel free to ask me at the very end. Okay, so we're gonna go back to, oh, sorry about that. We're gonna go back to our satisfactory academic progress issue that I talked about earlier. There's a lot more to it than what I was saying. So to be eligible for financial aid, students must maintain satisfactory academic progress. It is something that we do evaluate each quarter. Some schools do it, once every other quarter or once a year, but we do it every quarter. For students returning after a break of enrollment, we will look at your last terms of attendance. So that's going back to what I said earlier about it doesn't matter whether you were here 5 months ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. We do have to look at the last terms of attendance, and if you had been in a situation where you had withdrawn, whether you were on financial aid or not, that's when we're going to notify you about your status. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is, I know this sounds kind of crummy, but we are sister schools of SEC, and while we are different schools in the eyes of the government, we do have access to their admissions, and we are one school in a way, and so we do look at credits at both schools. So if you were at SEC and you decided to withdraw, or you had failed your classes or otherwise in a suspension probationary status over there, when you come to apply here, we take a look at it. And I know I've kind of got mixed reviews about that, but it's what we do. So don't be surprised if you get notification from us, even though we're a different school, saying you're on a suspension or probationary status because of what may have happened at the SEC a month ago or 10 years ago. We talked about the satisfactory academic progress requirements. There are 3 elements. There's the credits that we talked about, grade point average, and then pace of progression. And I'm going to talk about pace of progression in a bit detail more. We talked about satisfactory academic progress credit requirements. So here's that table I talked about earlier. So you can see here where there's the enrolled side of the matrix telling you what you originally enrolled in, what is going to maintain you in good standing, what is going to put you in a probationary status, and what's going to put you into a suspension status. One of the misconceptions that I have from students is that they say, hey, this is my very first quarter. Why am I in suspension? I thought I got a probation just the first time. That's not necessarily the case, specifically in regards to credits if you complete less than full or less than half time. So even if this is your very first quarter and you enrolled in pretty much any amount of credits and you completed less than half time, so less than 6 credits, you're going to automatically be in a suspension status. So really keep that in mind, because there are people who say only register in a math class and a PE class the first time around, and they happen to withdraw from that PE class because, darn, I sprained my ankle and I can't go. Well, even though it was just that 1 credit PE class, and even though it was your very first time here, you're going to automatically be suspended, okay? So keep that in mind too when you are registering. It can really put you in a situation if you're registering for less amount of credits, because every class that you don't complete, that will be more likely to put you in a situation of suspension status. Let's see here. GPA. What we talked about earlier was maintaining that 2.0 GPA. Again, we're not talking about just a class that you happen to do poorly in but yet still got credit for. There are situations that I have with students who they, for all other purposes, complete all their credits. They got all 12 credits and they actually have a good quarterly GPA, but they just had one bad class. They, you got a 1.7 in chem, whatever that might be. As long as you get credit for that class and otherwise are good, then you're fine. But if it's a situation where your quarterly GPA is below 2.0, or your college level GPA at the 6th quarter and past is below 2.0, that would have to be very difficult for you to do, but it happens. Then that's where we're going to put you either in a probationary or suspension status. So it goes back to those amount of credits that you register for. If you register for 6 credits and one of them's a math class and one of them's a PE class, and you happen to not get as good of a grade in that math class, even though you got credit for it, that's going to put you below a quarterly 2.0 GPA, and that's where that probationary suspension status will come in. Now, the new one is pace of progression. This is one that has been very difficult for us. It's been very difficult for students, and it can either help students to be in a new program or not. So the gist of pace of progression is that we are looking at the ratio of credits completed versus, or credits attempted versus credits completed. So it's literally a percentage. If you've only completed 50% of the classes that you've registered for, you are at a 50% pace of progression mark. We are looking for 67% or better. And then mind you, one of the new things that they've come up with, even after the changes started, was that it is for your current program only. So if you had done not so hot, pretty much for a year and a half in nursing, and now you've switched over to an AA program, we're only going to be looking at the pace of progression for that AA program. So keep that in mind. You know, if you did something where you really weren't doing well and your pace of progression isn't very good and now you switched over to a new program, it is isolated to just that program that you are currently in. But then part of that other issue with the degrees, and what we'll talk about in a bit more with maximum time frame, is that we will restrict you on the amount of degrees that you can complete an attempt. So keep that in mind. So pace of progression, credits attempted versus credits completed, what's that ratio? Remember about the withdraws, Z grades, incompletes, and fails. All of those come into play. So there may have been quarters prior where you had not completed classes, maybe you were on financial aid, you were ready to start, whatever it is. We still have to take all of those into consideration. So when you are thinking about getting a Z or an incomplete or withdrawing from a class here in the future, know that we are looking at your past, and that might be able, or that might negatively affect you. Financial aid warning. Students who fail to meet the credit and grade point average or pace of progression for satisfactory academic progress requirements will be placed on a financial aid warning. The warning they'll receive for one additional quarter. So say you registered for 12 credits and you only completed 10. You didn't have any other issues. It was just that one credit requirement issue. You're going to be on a warning status, and we are going to notify you. You have one more quarter in which you need to make sure that you're meeting all of the other requirements, both credits, pace of progression, and GPA. If you do not for that subsequent quarter, you're automatically going to be on suspension, even if you didn't meet the automatic suspension requirements that I talked about earlier. So if there's 2 quarters in a row that you just happen to not pass that darn fast fitness class, you know, you withdrew from it for whatever reason, if you got 2 in a row like that, that's an automatic suspension, even though it wasn't one of those automatic issues such as only completing 5 credits, okay? And then financial aid suspension, you know, we've already talked about that pretty extensively. You will automatically be placed on a suspension status if you complete less than half time, or any of those other kind of requirements that we saw there in that grid. You will be placed automatically on suspension if your 6-quarter GPA is below a 2.0, and you will be placed automatically on suspension if your pace of progression falls below 67%. So to all of that, you say, wow, there must be something I can do if I happen to not do so well, you know, had to have a medical withdrawal or something like that. Oh, mind you, medical withdrawals, I forgot to add that. I understand that some people might have a medical withdrawal. We are completely understanding that there are emergencies in life that happen. The medical withdrawals still do count for satisfactory academic progress. I've had a lot of those questions recently. Just keep that in mind. It will affect you differently as far as money that could be owed back to the school if you fully withdraw, but it's not going to save you from the satisfactory academic progress policy, okay? But going back to what can I do? The schools are given leeway by the government to do what's called an appeal process, where we are able to reinstate you based off of this process. So say you're placed on financial aid suspension at the end of the quarter because you completed only 5 credits out of 15. What you can do is we have an appeal, and in the appeal you are to explain what has happened, what you will do to improve yourself. And this appeal is meant for extenuating circumstances because we understand that things do happen in life. One of the things that we want to stress to students is that you only get 2 appeals, okay? We cannot allow for more than 2 appeals because we really shouldn't be continuating circumstances the past 2. So know that if you in your first 2 quarters you think, oh, I've been suspended and, you know, I got a couple of appeals you can work with, well, we're expecting that you're going to be here a couple of years. So you only get 2, and we cannot approve an appeal past those 2. So you really think about that as you're making decisions as far as classes and withdrawing and incompletes. Know as well as we start to talk about the maximum time frame policy that is also considered an appeal. I'll just go into that right now. Maximum time frame policy. We talked already a little bit about the credit requirements and that we can only fund up to a certain amount of credits. That credit requirement or that credit hold that you're going to be placed on is literally a hold, in which you are going to have to go through the appeal process, appealing to us, explaining why you have not completed the degree. You will need to meet with academic advisors such as Mrs. Osei, where you will go through and create an academic plan outlining the classes that are required for graduation and in which you are going to take them. you are only allowed to be funded for the classes that are literally required for graduation. So no, you cannot take PE for the 6th time. And we will be checking you on a quarterly basis for the classes that you are enrolled in, and we will put you on a hold status if you are not in the appropriate classes. It also comes into play what I talked about earlier with the credit requirements, is that because we can only fund you for the classes that are required, say there's a quarter because you have waited to take math until the very end. This is a very common thing that happens, where you only have 5 credits. You only have a math class that you have to take. You have to take that math sequence. We can only fund you for those 5 credits. And there are going to be situations with some of you where that disqualifies you from getting certain types of funds like loans or tuition grants, okay? So keep that in mind and work very, very closely with your academic advisors, because while we're not telling you that you have reign to, pursue options and pursue different classes and, broaden your experiences, there's only a certain amount of money that the government is going to give you for a certain amount of time, okay? Here. And remember too that those appeals do come into play with the maximum time frame, because it counts as an appeal if you've already had an appeal in the past because of a suspension issue, and now you have your too many credits appeal. That's pretty much it. That's all you're going to get, because that's your second appeal. No longer eligible for financial aid. So remember how I was talking about the amount of credit or degrees that you can attempt? With the maximum time frame policy and with pace of progression, we're only looking at the actual program that you're in at this moment in time, and students say, oh, well, I can just switch my program. Know that we can only fund you for a certain amount of programs. You are allowed to be funded for 2 programs, like actual 2 degrees, and or certificates, or 3 attempted programs. So if you were, say, registered for nursing, and you took a couple of quarters there, and then you decided to switch over to fine arts, and now you decided you wanted to be a mechanical engineer, you better stick with that program, because we can't fund you for any more programs outside of those 3. I know, that's hard, but it is meant to keep students from going from program to program to program and basically being lifetime students. We do have a few of those who want to do that. So, and again, we try to be as understanding as possible. If there's programs that intermix with each other, we've had some issues, with like the graphic design, web design, stuff like that. By all means, please come talk to academic advising or us about issues like that. But for the most part, it's pretty cut and dry. Know the programs that you're in, know what you're attempting, and know that we can only fund so many of them. Oh, and then also mathematically possible. I forgot to mention this earlier. Going back to the pace of progression issue, when we say that you need to be at a 67% rate for your pace of progression, the government allows us to give you 2 hypothetical quarters in which to get up to a 67%. So say through rule of averages, you've only taken 2 quarters and you're only at a 12% pace of progression. If we cannot hypothetically, at a reasonable credit amount, 25 credits per quarter is not reasonable, but at a reasonable credit amount, not get you up to a 67%, and when I say hypothetical, that means you taking and completing X amount of credits to get up to that rate, the government says that we cannot allow for you to receive financial aid anymore. It will be an automatic denial. So really keep that in mind too as you're making decisions about the classes that you take and drawing and things like that. And again, if you guys want to talk about that afterwards, I'm more than happy to. It is a very complex thing, so just let me know. Okay, so we talked about maximum time frame pretty in depth, I think, so far. Know that remedial classes at 100 and the level below do not count against you in this situation, either for pace of progression or for maximum time frame. We are fully aware that some of you might test into a math that is not at the 99 level. Say you might place into pre-algebra. Well, that's automatically going to put you at least 4 math classes. We understand that, so does the government. And so those classes do not count against you when we are counting up your credits for the maximum time frame and pace of progression issues. I think that we've covered pretty much everything at this point in time. So we've covered census day, satisfactory academic progress, credit requirements, enrollment issues. So I think we'll be done for the presentation at this point.